Hello everyone, I am Saurabh and I welcome you back to the Digital Board series by Orchids Biosciences. This is the fifth video for How Do Organisms Reproduce. If you haven't watched the previous videos yet, I have provided its link in the description below, so please do look for it. In this video, we will discuss the process of reproduction, which involves various steps starting with fertilization, followed by implantation, gestation, and finally birth. We will also discuss what will happen if the egg is not fertilized and how it is removed from the body by the process of menstruation. We will also look at what is menarche and menopause. After that, we will discuss about reproductive health and various methods devised to avoid pregnancy. So let's study the various steps in the process of reproduction. The very first step in the process of reproduction is fertilization. We already know what basically fertilization is. It is the fusion of male gamete and the female gamete to give rise to a resultant structure called zygote. So the fusion of male and female gamete to give rise to a zygote is called as fertilization. After fertilization, zygote is formed, which will later develop into an embryo, and finally this embryo will develop into a new individual. So in the process of reproduction, this is the very first step, that is fertilization, which is the fusion of male and female gamete. In human beings, the male gamete is sperm and the female gamete can be called as egg. So in human beings, the sperm will be fertilizing the egg, or we can say the sperm and egg will fuse to give rise to zygote, and this is fertilization in human beings. Now let us see how the process of fertilization happens in human beings. During copulation, millions of sperms will be released into the vagina. Now the sperms, since they are motile and active, will be able to travel from the vagina, then to cervix, uterus, and finally reach the fallopian tube. We know that the egg which is produced in the ovary will be present in the fallopian tube. So the sperm has to reach the fallopian tube in order to fertilize it. There will be millions of sperms that will be released into the vagina, but not every sperm will be able to reach the egg, because there will be various female secretions present due to which the sperms will be destroyed. So the few sperms which are able to survive will be able to reach the egg. So this is the egg and these are surrounded by the sperms. So out of the sperms which are able to reach the egg, only the sperm which reaches the egg first will be able to fertilize it. So therefore, only one egg will be fertilized by one sperm. As soon as the sperm enters the egg will close its cover, or the egg will close itself so that no more sperm can enter it. So one egg will be fertilized only by one sperm, and this fertilization will lead to a structure called as zygote. The zygote will later develop into an embryo. So we can see there is egg here, then this egg is getting surrounded by the sperm after the process of copulation, then the sperm is fusing with the egg to form a structure called as zygote. Then this zygote later goes on repeated divisions to form the embryo, and finally this embryo, which is undergoing various divisions, will travel through the fallopian tube and come to the uterus. Now this embryo, or we can say the developing embryo, will finally get attached to the uterine wall, to the inner lining of the uterus. So when the embryo gets attached to the inner lining of uterus, this process is called as implantation. So we can say implantation is the process of attachment of the developing embryo to the uterine wall. So this is how fertilization occurs. That is, sperm is released into the vagina and the first sperm which reaches the egg will fertilize it and form the structure that is zygote. So the first step that happens here is fertilization, followed by fertilization, implantation. So this is the second step in the process of reproduction. Moving on to next. Here the embryo, after getting implanted, gets nutrition from the mother's blood through a special tissue which is called as placenta. This placenta will be surrounding the entire embryo and finally the fetus as well, and it acts as a connection between the mother and the fetus. The placenta will have numerous villi on the embryo side, whereas on the mother's side there will be blood spaces. This villi are present so that it can give more surface area for absorption of materials. Now what substances will be absorbed, or what substances will be transported in between the fetus and the mother? From the mother to the fetus through the placenta, glucose and oxygen will be passing, whereas there will be various waste material which will be generated by the embryo. So the waste material from the embryo to the mother will be transported. So placenta is a connecting link between the mother and the fetus, or we can say embryo, and it helps in the transport of glucose and oxygen from the mother to the developing embryo or the fetus, and the transport of waste material from the fetus to the mother's blood. After implantation, we saw that this placenta is developed. After implantation, the period during which the embryo development takes place in the uterus is called as gestation period. So gestation period is the period of embryo development. Embryo development, or we can say the gestation period in human beings, is approximately of 9 months. Few days just before the birth, the fetus will move inside the uterus until the head of the fetus will start pointing towards the cervix. So once this gestation period is complete and the time of birth is approaching, the fetus will continuously move inside the mother's womb, or we can say inside the uterus, till the head, this is the head region, the head starts pointing towards the cervix. Now when the time of birth comes, the child is born as a result of rhythmic contraction of the muscles of the uterus. So these are the uterine muscles as well as the abdominal muscles. So the child is born as a rhythmic contraction of muscles in the uterus along with the contractions of abdominal muscles. So finally through the vagina, the baby will come out. So far we have seen what happens if the egg is fertilized and how it results in the birth of a new organism. Now, what if the egg is not fertilized? If the egg is not fertilized, then this egg lives or remains alive for approximately 1 day or about 1 day. Since the ovary releases one egg every month, the uterus also prepares itself every month to receive a fertilized egg. So every month the uterus will be preparing itself to receive a fertilized egg, that is the embryo. So every month the uterus lining becomes thick and spongy, so that will be able to bear the embryo and take care of its nourishment. Now since the egg is not fertilized and there will be no embryo attachment to the uterine walls, the uterus doesn't need to be any more thick and spongy because it does not have to support any more developing embryo. Now however the lining is no longer needed, it slowly breaks down and comes out through the vagina as blood and mucus. And this is called as menstruation. So in menstruation what happens? The linings of the uterus, which is richly supplied with the blood vessels, will all break down and will come out through the vagina as blood and mucus. And this process is called as menstruation. This cycle takes place roughly every month. So every month the egg will be produced, but it is not necessary that every month the egg will be fertilized. This unfertilized egg along with the uterine linings will come out as blood and mucus, which is called as menstruation. This cycle takes place roughly every month and usually lasts for about 2 to 8 days. In a girl, the beginning of menstrual cycle is called as menarche, which starts from the age of 10 to 15 years when a girl attains her puberty, while the end of menstruation is called as menopause, which takes place around the age range of 50 years. After menopause, the women will not be able to conceive again. So menarche is the beginning of the menstrual cycle, or we can say it is the beginning of the reproductive life, whereas menopause marks the end of menstruation. So far we have seen, or we have discussed in detail about the sexual reproduction in human beings, but there are possible health consequences as well of having sex. It is because diseases can be transmitted from one person to another in variety of ways. Since the sexual act is a very intimate connection between two bodies, many diseases can be transmitted. And the diseases which are transmitted through sexual contact are called as sexually transmitted diseases. In short, it is also called as STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. These include bacterial infection, for example, gonorrhea and syphilis, and viral infections, which include genital warts and HIV/AIDS. So these examples you have to remember for STDs. For bacterial infection, it's gonorrhea and syphilis, and for viral infections, they are warts and HIV/AIDS. So these are few examples for the sexually transmitted diseases, the diseases which are transmitted through sexual contact. It is possible to prevent the transmission of such diseases during the sexual act using a covering which is called as condom. During sex, what happens? This condom will prevent the transmission of many of these diseases to some extent. So using a condom can prevent STDs. Sexual acts always have the potential to lead to pregnancy, which makes major demands on the body and mind of the woman if she is not ready for it. Her health will be also adversely affected. So therefore, to avoid pregnancy, there are various methods which are devised. So now let us look at the various methods devised to prevent pregnancy. The first one is mechanical method. It is the creation of a mechanical barrier so that the sperm does not reach the egg. Example is condom. Condom on the penis or similar coverings which are worn in the vagina can serve this purpose, so that it will create a barrier between the sperm and the egg so that the sperm does not reach the egg. So if sperm doesn't reach the egg, fertilization will not happen. So this acts as a mechanical barrier, and the example is condom. The next one is chemical methods. In chemical method, it involves the changing of hormonal balance. So if the hormonal balance is disturbed or changed using certain drugs, the eggs will not be released, and if eggs are not released, no fertilization can take place. These drugs are commonly taken as oral pills. However, since they change the hormonal balance, they can also cause side effects. Another method is the use of IUDs. IUDs stand for intrauterine devices. So these are the devices which are placed inside the uterus. Contraceptives such as copper T can be used as intrauterine devices. These copper T are placed in the uterus to avoid pregnancy. Again, since it is placed in the uterus, it has the possibility to cause irritation in the uterus and also can cause side effects. Last one is the surgical methods. We know that the tube which conducts the sperm in male is called as the vas deferens. And the tube which has the egg after being released from the ovary is called as fallopian tube, or can also be called as oviduct. Now, if the vas deferens is cut and ligated, then there will be no more conduction of sperm from the vas deferens and it will not be released from the penis. So if vas deferens is cut and ligated, the sperm will not be released. Cutting and ligating the vas deferens is called as vasectomy. And the process of cutting and ligating the fallopian tube is called as tubectomy. Here vasectomy, vas refers to vas deferens, and here tubectomy, tube refers to the fallopian tube. So in vasectomy, the vas deferens is cut and ligated so that the sperm cannot travel through it and reach the penis, through which it is released into the vagina. And tubectomy, what happens? The fallopian tube is cut and ligated so that the sperm will not reach the egg. So these are the surgical methods. While surgical methods are very safe in the long run, the surgery itself can cause infections. So these are its disadvantage. And one more very important drawback of the surgical method is it is poorly reversible. So once the surgery is performed, it cannot be easily reversible. So this is also called as permanent method of avoiding pregnancy or permanent method of contraceptions because it cannot be reversed back. Surgery can also be performed to avoid unwanted pregnancy. However, these may be misused by certain people who do not want a particular child, as happens in illegal sex-selective abortions of female fetuses. So if a parent doesn't want a specific sex of child, they will simply abort the child using the surgery, which is illegal in our country. So surgery, which is actually used for avoiding unwanted pregnancy, can also be misused by certain group of people to perform sex-selective abortions. For a healthy society, the female and male sex ratio should be maintained. But the child sex ratio is declining at an alarming rate in some sections of our society. So surgery, which is actually used for avoiding unwanted pregnancy, can also be misused in some cases to do sex-selective abortions, where the parent doesn't require child of a specific or particular sex. So with this, we cover all the topics of this chapter. Now let us quickly recall what we have seen in this video. We started with the various steps involved in the process of reproduction. First one is fertilization, that is the fusion of the male gamete, that is sperm, and the female gamete, that is egg, to form a structure called as zygote. We saw where the fertilization happens inside the fallopian tube. Now this zygote will develop into an embryo, and this embryo will get attached to the inner lining of the uterus, and this is called as implantation. Next, after implantation, the placenta will develop, which is a connecting link between the mother and the fetus. The third step is gestation. Gestation is a period during which the embryo development takes place in the uterus, and gestation is approximately of 9 months in human beings. After gestation, last one is birth. Just few days before birth, the fetus will keep moving in the uterus until the head points towards the cervix. And finally, the child is born as a result of rhythmic contraction of uterine as well as abdominal muscles. So these were the 4 steps that we have discussed in the process of reproduction. After discussing this, we discussed what is menstruation. Menstruation is a removal of egg as well as the inner lining of the uterus, since the egg is not fertilized, in the form of mucus and blood through the vagina. This happens roughly around every month, and it stays for a period of 2 to 8 days. And the starting of the menstrual cycle in females is called as menarche, and the end of menstruation is called as menopause. So menarche is the beginning of menstrual cycle or menstruation, whereas menopause is the end of menstruation, after which the female cannot conceive. After menstruation, we discussed about the STDs. In STDs, we saw bacterial infections and viral infections. In bacterial infections, we saw 2 examples. They are gonorrhea and syphilis. And for viral infection, we saw genital warts and HIV/AIDS. We also saw how we can prevent the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases, that is by the use of a condom. After that, we saw the various methods devised to avoid pregnancy. First one is mechanical barrier, for which we use a condom. So this acts as a mechanical barrier so that the sperm does not reach the egg. The next one that we discussed was the chemical method. In chemical method, it changes the hormonal balance using drugs so that the eggs are not released and fertilization cannot occur. After that, we discussed about IUDs or intrauterine devices, in which we saw about the copper T. So contraceptives such as copper T are placed in the uterus to avoid pregnancy. Again, this can cause side effects and irritation of the uterus. The last method that we discussed was surgical method. And the drawback of surgical method is it is very poorly reversible. Surgical methods, we saw 2. One is vasectomy and another one is tubectomy. And then we discuss how surgery can be useful for avoiding unwanted pregnancies. But we also saw that surgery can be misused by certain people for sex-selective abortions. So with this, we come to the end of this chapter. Now let us discuss questions from the previous years. The question is, list 3 techniques that have been developed to prevent pregnancy. Which of these techniques is not meant for males? First, they are asking us to list 3 techniques which have been developed to avoid pregnancy. So we can mention 3. Mechanical we can mention, which include the condoms. We can mention the chemical methods, which use the oral contraceptive pills. And then we can mention about the surgical methods. In surgical methods, we can talk about vasectomy and tubectomy. So these are the 3 methods we can mention. Then they are asking, which method is not meant for males? Not for males, it is chemical methods. Because in chemical methods, the hormonal balance of the female will be changed. Because if the hormonal balance of the female is changed, the egg will not be produced. And so that the fertilization cannot happen. So by changing the hormonal balance of the female, fertilization is avoided. So chemical methods are not meant for males. How does the use of these techniques have a direct impact on the health and prosperity of the family? The use of such contraceptive methods have various benefits. Having pregnancy at very quick successions reduces the mother's health. So use of contraceptive will thus affect the maternal health status. So using this contraceptive will increase or improve the maternal health status. One more point that we can tell here is, some contraceptive devices such as condoms are also helpful in preventing the sexually transmitted diseases. So these 2 points we can write, how it is having a direct impact on health and prosperity of a family. First thing, it will improve the maternal or mother's health status and also prevents the sexually transmitted diseases from transferring from one to another human being. So with this, we come to the end of this video as well as this chapter. In the next video, we will discuss the next chapter, heredity and evolution. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel.